This video is sponsored by NordVPN. We all know Google makes the smartest phone in the world right now, but where did this all come from? No, not the Pixel One or even the Galaxy Nexus. It goes further back than that. A device that 15 years ago had everyone's eyebrows raised, but perhaps not for the same reasons that you'd initially expect. It had some bizarre and cutting-edge features, competing in the still very young smartphone segment, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Hey guys, I'm Ryan Thomas, and this is the Google Nexus One, a phone that launched 15 years ago, the year the Burj Khalifa was inaugurated, when Apple launched the iPad, and of course when Instagram was born. To fully understand the significance of this little phone, you have to realise the market in which it was operating. We're talking 2010, a time when the iPhone 3GS had been around for a short while already. Samsung, Motorola and HTC were big players in the space. Some of the more popular phones of 2010 had 4G in their name because 4G was the hot new thing. Apple had not yet fully run away with the mobile phone market. In fact, though Android was right up there with iOS, we still weren't counting out the likes of Palm OS, BBOS. A Windows Phone was hot off the press in 2010. The smartphone market was anyone's game. So when Google, the company known for the worldwide search engine, decided to make a smartphone in partnership with Taiwanese powerhouse HTC, people were interested in what it would come up with. It was already obvious that whilst HTC would be building the hardware, Google would put its know-how into building a truly smart operating system. More on that after a word from today's sponsor. One of the most convenient and handy inventions of the last few years is certainly a VPN, and that's where today's video sponsor NordVPN comes in, with their superb Black Friday and Cyber Monday deals. Not only does this service help you browse anonymously, tunneling your network traffic through another region which helps secure your connection, but it's also just really handy for watching programs and movies that you wouldn't get in your home version of Netflix, for example. Or if, like me, you are a die-hard Premier League fanatic and you go on holiday, being able to log into your streaming apps just as you normally would without a fuss is brilliant, and NordVPN allows for that. It works on Mac, Windows, iOS and our beloved Android. It's easy to install and get set up, and if you go to nordvpn.com/androidpolice, you'll get up to 77% off a 2-year plan and 3 months extra. So check out that link in the video description, and a big thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring today's content. Codenamed HTC Passion, the Nexus One launched in early 2010. Its super fast Snapdragon S1, half a gigabyte of RAM, really helped the phone gain a reputation among reviewers as one of the fastest phones you could buy, if you can believe that. Which sounds mental given we now have phones with like 16 gigs of RAM these days. Interestingly though, the one shipped with a 4GB microSD card because the fixed internal storage was actually the same capacity as the RAM, just 512 megabytes. Other notable inclusions were a 5 megapixel camera capable of a whopping 480p video at 24 frames per second, and arguably the star of the show was the 3.7-inch 800 by 480 AMOLED. Yeah, this 15-year-old phone shipped with an OLED panel, and it was a super impressive screen for the time. 480p doesn't do it justice. It doesn't sound high resolution today, but on what we would now consider an absolutely tiny display, actually doesn't look too bad at all. The Nexus One was also built of metal, and this thing feels luxurious even in 2025. It's smooth, it's pebble-like in its shape, and mixed with the dense weighting really helped it compete with some generally quite plasticky Androids at the time. But I also think this hardware has aged really well. After having used HTCs of the same era, you can definitely feel the DNA in the external design. Let me know what you think of this thing in the comment section, by the way. Fascinatingly, reading Nexus One reviews reveals a trend of talking points. Journalists liked its high-end build quality and gorgeous AMOLED display, as they absolutely have every right to do. This thing's brilliant. They also enjoyed its capable 5 megapixel camera, its super smart software with built-in voice recognition, but also put off by the lack of proper multi-touch support, which is what the iPhone had at the time. Generally middling battery life, and John Brandon's review for TechRadar pointed out the lack of a dedicated phone button or a real keypad as cons for this phone. Yeah, that's the era we're dealing with right now. Generally though, software and speed were the big pulls for this phone, which is funny because the former is certainly Google's biggest focus 15 years later, but the latter has seen a dip in priority. Unfortunately for Google at the time though, these pulls would not be enough to make a big impact in the market. After 75 days on sale, or about 2.5 months, there are reports of just 135,000 total sales of the Nexus One, where in the same amount of time, Apple had sold 1 million iPhone 3GSs and Motorola had sold just over 1 million Droids. Google had not entered the market with a screamer. In fact, unfortunately for the Nexus One, HTC would come out with a model just a month after that would properly show this thing up in reviews. The Desire was incredibly well received, and though perhaps not as technically impressive as the One, as annoyed as I am to say this, I would maybe say the HTC Desire just had more aura than the Nexus One. It had a bit more about it and it reflected in the reviews. And in 2010, when going into a store to buy a phone was actually kind of a normal thing to do, the Nexus One couldn't grasp the same kind of audience or consumer base as the HTC Desire, which was offered in stores. The One stripped back most of the bloat that plagues earlier Androids and delivered what was dubbed the world's first superphone. This was how Google envisioned Android in the real world. It felt like the company really wanted to make a smart phone. And I think this fundamental backbone is mirrored in the latest and greatest Google Pixel models. Sure, they are now made by Google from the ground up with, not only their own designs, but physical internal hardware, like its own SoCs for the last 5 years. And I think that the dynamic microphone array, turn-by-turn navigation, and for the time very impressive speech-to-text, all available on this, are simply saplings that blossomed to grow into Audio Eraser, Google Gemini, and Google Maps. Pixels are the smartest phones ever made in 2025, and who knows if they'd be as clever as they are now had Google not made the Nexus One. Of course, not only were there many different models between the Nexus One and the Pixel 10, but as similar as they are, in my opinion the Nexus line is just a distinctly different kind of phone from the Pixel. Whilst I feel the Nexus was built for the enthusiast with its easily unlockable bootloader, its funky backlit trackball, its super stripped back software and its direct to consumer model that Google initially went with, this was never the phone that your mum or your uncle were ever going to buy, but more for enthusiasts, tinkerers, geeks if you want to be blunt about it. This was early Android, before Windows Mobile. The Pixel, as is evident in Google's completely different marketing material, is built for everybody, for those young and old, markets across the world, and equally to those who love benchmarking their phones and those who have absolutely no idea what benchmarking even means. Some might argue the Pixel was designed to take as much data off you as possible, but others would say that the smarts that those phones have really make up for that, and you can make your own mind up regarding that issue because that very much is a personal thing. The Nexus One was a show of intent from Google. It was a statement release and one that would go on to lay the groundwork and the foundations for Google's brilliant phones 15 years later. Sure, it didn't sell well, and you could make the case that it might not have been the most complete smartphone at that time. When Apple was breaking boundaries and BlackBerry was still producing some absolute bangers. But I don't think that matters much because Google is currently killing it, and it owes an awful lot to this little beast. Proof that Google's deep down belief is that software is king, a principle that has remained a decade and a half later. Were you around the tech scene during the Nexus line's inception? Do you still have a phone like this lying around? I'd love to hear about it. It's truly mesmerizing to hold this up to a new Pixel and just be in awe of how far these things have come. I know right now it feels like smartphones are kind of plateauing, and that's totally understandable, but I do feel like when you put these things side by side, 15 years difference, it is clear as day just how much progress we've made. I'd love to hear about your experiences and stories with early Android, so let us all know in the comment section. And whilst you're down there, be sure to hit like if you enjoyed today's content and subscribe to never miss another upload. Thank you all so much for watching. I've been Ryan Thomas, and I'll catch you later. Cheers.